The baby's scream pierced the cabin just as the plane began to taxi, sharp, desperate, the kind of cry that twists a parent's heart into knots. Passengers groaned, flight attendants exchanged cautious glances, and a young father in seat 17B pressed his trembling hand to his forehead, whispering, "Please, please, Lily, not now." He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Across the aisle, a woman paused mid-page in her book. Her eyes lifted, softening with recognition, not annoyance, as she watched the frantic father bounce, shush, and rock the red-faced infant who only grew louder. The woman, Emma, knew that sound too well. She had lived that moment. Survived it. And she could see in the man's shaking hands the exact fear she once felt, the fear of being judged, of failing, of being alone, and she had no idea that before this flight ended, she would do something that would change all three of their lives. Mark had boarded the plane sweating, overwhelmed before his seatbelt even clicked. He had packed everything a new father could think of: bottles, burp cloths, pacifier backups, tiny socks, a rattle shaped like a giraffe he was pretty sure the baby hated. But none of it mattered now. Lily was screaming with the unstoppable force of a child who could not be reasoned with, and the more he panicked, the worse it seemed to get. He had been a father for only 10 months, but he had been a single father for 8 of them, ever since Lily's mother, overwhelmed and unprepared, had walked out one cold November morning, leaving nothing behind but a note that said, "She'll be better off with you." He hadn't heard from her since. This trip was his first attempt at visiting his parents in another state, the first time he'd flown with Lily, the first time he'd tried to prove to himself he could handle something big again. But as the wails escalated, he felt humiliation burning his skin. A man too rose up, muttered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear, "Seriously? If you can't control your kid, maybe don't bring her on a plane." Mark swallowed hard. "I'm trying," he whispered, bouncing Lily faster, his arms aching, but she only cried harder. Emma watched the scene unraveling with a tightening in her chest. Her own daughter, Grace, now 5 years old, sat quietly beside her with headphones and a tablet, blissfully unaware. But Emma remembered the first 2 years of flights, the glares, the audible sighs, the whispered judgments from strangers who assumed she wasn't trying hard enough. She also remembered what it felt like to parent alone. To carry bags, bottles, expectations, and fear all at once without anyone to share the weight. She nudged Grace gently. "Sweetheart, I'll be right here, okay?" Her daughter nodded. Emma took a breath, unbuckled her seatbelt, and stood. With deliberate calm, she walked across the aisle and knelt beside Mark, who looked up with startled, exhausted eyes. "Can I help?" she asked softly. He blinked. I'm sorry. I don't think anything will. She does this sometimes when she's overtired, and I'm really sorry." "It's okay," Emma interrupted, her voice warm and steady. "Really? I've been there." He stared at her, searching for judgment and finding none. She held out her arms just a little. "May I try?" Mark hesitated. Not because he didn't want the help, but because he didn't want to seem like he couldn't do it himself. But Lily's cries were turning his insides inside out. His hands were shaking. And he was seconds away from breaking down. Finally, he whispered, "Please." She gently lifted Lily and rested the baby against her shoulder with practiced ease. The smell of baby lotion and formula tugged old memories forward, late nights, early mornings, and all the moments she thought she wouldn't survive but somehow did. She hummed first. Then swayed. Slow, gentle, rhythmic. A mother's instinct guiding every motion. To Mark's astonishment, and the passenger's relief, Lily's cries softened, then slowed, then stopped completely as she melted into sleep. The cabin grew quiet. People stared. But now, instead of irritation, there was awe. Mark covered his face, shaking with relief. How did you do that?" Emma offered a small smile. "Years of practice." For the next hour, Emma held Lily while Mark rested his head back, looking like he might cry from gratitude alone. They talked quietly, voices matching the hum of the engines. He told her about raising Lily alone, about the fear of failing her, about how this trip was supposed to prove he could do big things again. Instead, he felt like he'd fallen apart before the plane even left the ground. Emma told him about her own journey, being left by her husband when Grace was 2 months old, the nights she cried in the bathroom so her daughter wouldn't hear, the flights where she felt the whole world judged her for having a baby who just needed comfort. People forget, she said, glancing around the cabin, that babies cry because it's the only way they can communicate. And parents break because we're human. Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. I thought I was doing everything wrong. You're not, she said firmly. You're doing your best. And that's enough. Her words landed with the weight of truth, heavy, comforting, undeniable. When the plane finally reached cruising altitude, Emma carefully handed a now sleeping Lily back to Mark. He held his daughter with renewed gentleness, staring down at her tiny, peaceful face as if seeing her differently now. You're amazing, he said quietly. Emma shook her head. Just someone who understands. But the passengers around them didn't see just someone. They had witnessed something quietly extraordinary, compassion in a place where judgment was easier. A mother stepping in, not because she had to, but because she knew what it meant to struggle in public, and that choice had changed the entire atmosphere of the plane. When the aircraft landed, people exiting the cabin did something unexpected. They stopped to tell Mark he was doing a great job. They complimented his daughter, offered encouragement, even apologized for their earlier frustration. It was as if Emma's compassion had softened everyone else too. At the gate, Mark turned to her one last time. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, she said, nodding toward Grace, who waved shyly at Lily. You reminded me why I survived all those hard years. So I could help someone else through theirs. Mark's eyes softened. Can I keep in touch? Maybe the girls could have a playdate someday? Emma hesitated, not because of reluctance, but because of the unexpected warmth blooming in her chest. It had been a long time since anyone looked at her with that much genuine gratitude and hope. She smiled. I'd like that. As they walked toward baggage claim, him pushing a stroller, her holding Grace's hand, they looked strangely like a family. Not the kind that's born, but the kind that forms in moments of empathy strong enough to bridge loneliness. Sometimes life doesn't change in grand gestures. Sometimes it changes when one exhausted parent turns to another and says, "Let me help." And sometimes the smallest cry leads two strangers to cross paths, lighten each other's burdens, and walk away carrying a bit more hope than they had before. Message of the story: you never know the battles someone is fighting, especially a parent doing it alone. A little compassion can change an entire experience, a whole day, or even a life. What looks like a crying baby might actually be a silent cry for help from the adult holding them. And sometimes, the most extraordinary thing you can do is simply step forward and say, you don't have to do this alone. Red Heart. Subscribe to Be Kindness Journey Hub for more real, inspiring stories that remind us how powerful simple kindness can be. Thumbs up like this video, bell, turn on the notifications.